I'm sure we always start our speeches in Irish, but it's also good to see how you react, and I can spot the Irish people. Do you understand what I just said? But that's Irish for a very, very warm welcome here today. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for hosting me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you also to President Chris Williams, and also to Bob Braubach, who helped me get along here today. It's always a great pleasure for me to be here in San Antonio. I visit the city very, very often, especially last year during the city's tercentenary, and was a wonderful occasion. We were glad to celebrate it, given the role that the Irish have played throughout the history of the city, you know, from defending the Alamo to defending the preservation of the Alamo. You know, the Irish have played a key role in the city and continue to do so today. I was also delighted about 2 months ago to welcome the Irish ambassador to the United States, Dan Mulhall, on his first visit to the city. It was really, really wonderful. And just before Christmas, my last visit just before to San Antonio, just before Christmas, a very special occasion in Ireland when a citizen hits their 100th birthday. They get an award from our president, and I was delighted to present 2 awards to 2 Irish-born nuns who are at Immaculate Word here, who hit their 100th birthdays just before Christmas. A wonderful celebration. And also, one of our largest Irish community organisations in Texas is here. Some of you may be members of the Harp and Shamrock. We also have Adrian Brett here today. We've a great Irish sports club here as well, so plenty going on. I really appreciate, though, the invitation to speak at Rotary today. I personally want to thank you for everything that you do. I think we'd all agree, probably in today's world, there's nothing more important than people who work to serve and improve the lives of others. Rotary has clubs across the world, including in Ireland, and some of you may actually know that the first Rotary club that was established outside the United States was in my home city of Dublin in Ireland. The Dublin Rotarians first met on the 22nd of February 1911, so I think they're just a few months older than this club here, and I'm happy to say that the Dublin Rotary Club is still going strong today. Well, today is a very exciting time for Ireland and to the Irish. We're on the eve of the centenary of our independence. Ireland's changing a lot. It's a very young country. We have the youngest population in Europe. Leo Varadkar, our Taoiseach, it's another Irish word, or Prime Minister in English, is just 39 years of age, and many Irish ministers and government are around the same age range as well. And as many of you know, I mean, you just have to look at the Irish population in San Antonio. Ireland has traditionally been a country of emigration, but with the booming economy in the last decade, it's a surprise to many that now about 17%, going on 1 in 5 of the people living in Ireland were not born in Ireland. Our Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar himself, may be a good example of this. He's half Irish and half Indian, and he's also one of the few LGBT heads of government in the world. Ireland's economy is performing strongly, as it has for several years. The underlying growth rate for the last 5 years is about 4.5%, which is the strongest in Europe. But what I'm here to talk to you today are some potential challenges on the horizon, namely the decision by our neighbours in the UK to leave the European Union. Now, Ireland and Britain, quick history lesson, I'll be very, very brief. Ireland and Britain joined what is today's European Union, then the EEC, on the same day in 1973. Denmark, the 3 of us joined on the same day. But our experiences of membership have been remarkably different. We have, however, we and the British have tended to be very, very strong allies of each other inside the European Union, and that's one of the reasons why we profoundly regret the decision that our neighbours took to leave. The Irish government campaigned in June 2016 during the Brexit referendum campaign for Britain to stay inside the European Union, and we thought that our friend, our neighbour next door, could push for the reforms it sought more effectively from within the EU, but we do fully respect, and I think that's an underlying theme of today, we do fully respect the outcome of the democratic vote in June 2016. But Ireland is a very different country to the United Kingdom. I often say in Texas, it's important to know that the population of Ireland is 4.7 million people, so it's actually smaller than the city of Houston. So with a very small population, a small domestic market, our economic strength in Ireland, and we're the 9th largest global investor in the United States at the moment, but our economic strength is really built on our exports to 3 key markets. And those markets are the United States, the UK, and of course the rest of the European Union. We export everything from pharmaceuticals to software to medical devices, and of course the old reliables, our food and drinking products as well, around the world, but especially into our neighbour in Britain. And while our dependency on the British market is much lower than it was in 1973 when we joined the European Union, when half of our exports went to Britain. Today, still 17% of all our goods go next door to the British market. So in terms of the proportion of our exports, Ireland is the country with the most to lose, I guess you could say, from Britain leaving the European Union. Post-Brexit, Ireland will also be further cut off from the rest of the European Union. Many of our exports, and as I keep stressing, we're one of the world's largest per capita exporters. Many Irish exporters are actually driven through the UK as well. They're loaded up in the port of Dublin, ferried over to the UK, they're driven to the UK and then on to the rest of Europe. And Ireland will also in future be the only EU member state with a land border with the United Kingdom. The border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland will now become the border between the UK and the EU. Let me give you some facts about this border. And there's a lot of talk about the border here between Texas and Mexico, but the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland is also a fascinating place. It's 500 kilometers long. We're metric, by the way. I should have converted that into miles, but it's a 500 kilometer long border, and it's fully open. There's no barriers in the border. It's crisscrossed by about 260 roads, some of them major highways, some of them very, very small country roads, also cycle paths, rail lines, you name it, it's there. And every day, tens of thousands of people and goods move from one side to the other. It's not at all unusual in Ireland for people to grow up on one side and maybe go to school or college or even work on the other side. That's quite normal. So I know from talking to some of you beforehand that many of you have probably been to Ireland. And those of you who were in Ireland more than 20 years will recall that the peaceful border area today, that wasn't always the case, unfortunately. From the late 1960s to the mid-1990s, Northern Ireland, as many of you may recall, was devastated by terrorism, with a huge number of very, very sad fatalities, injuries, and it was a very awful time during that 30-year period. We just finished celebrating the 20th anniversary of the signature of the Good Friday Peace Agreement that was signed in April 1998. And that was signed by the communities in Northern Ireland, and the British and Irish governments were listed or acted as co-guarantors. And today, people in Northern Ireland have the right to claim both citizenships. They can become British or Irish or both. And of course, at the moment, both those citizenships give those people in Northern Ireland citizenship of the EU. After Brexit, that will only be the Irish citizenship that will give them that. But when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, nobody seriously thought that one of the two co-guarantors would actually be leaving the EU. So a lot of the agreement is predicated on the basis that the two countries will stay inside the EU. The peace agreement was very, very hard won. It's generated as well in the last 20 years enormous prosperity, not just in Northern Ireland, but the entire border region. And securing that peace was a very long and very painstaking process. Maintaining that peace is of critical importance, not just in Northern Ireland, but for the whole island of Ireland. The economic benefits of the open border as well are of major importance to the Northern Ireland economy. But as I said, the peace dividend, the fact that communities on both sides of the border can now engage and interact with each other without any physical barriers, these are even more critical in maintaining peace into the future. And these are all reasons why the Irish government has stressed since the very night of the Brexit referendum, when the decision was clear that Britain was going to leave, that the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland must stay open. And all of the other 26 countries that form part of the European Union back Ireland on this issue. So if Britain leaves the EU without a resolution or a deal, and they're due to leave on the 30th of March, or so, if this is a so-called hard Brexit, we fear the return of a physical hard border. There's many, many challenges. I mean, there'll be customs issues and duties and imports, and also regulatory differences as well between the two sides. And this is in an area with a very, very strong level of cross-border trade. Some of you that I spoke to earlier were talking, just when you were coming here, you said you were listening on the radio to some reporting from London on this. And obviously I won't go into that in detail today, but the uncertainty caused by the developments in the last week or even 2 weeks in London is a cause of great concern, obviously, for the people of Ireland, but especially in Northern Ireland. And we firmly believe that people deserve the reassurance and certainty that the withdrawal agreement that the rest of the European Union, which includes provisions called the backstop provisions for Northern Ireland, which would prevent a hard border, we think that that really is the best solution for now. But I guess, again, coming out of the reports that have come in overnight, I think what I'm talking about Ireland and the other 26 EU countries, the EU member states across Europe, what we need now from the UK is clarity on how it proposes to move forward and ultimately what it wants to achieve, within its future relationship with the European Union. Now, in the Republic of Ireland, which I represent, we're preparing for all possible outcomes, including the so-called hard Brexit, if there's no agreement reached, particularly in relation to its impact on trade. Our government at a local level has undertaken a range of measures to help small businesses, because small businesses would be the ones that will be hit first, I guess, because they're obviously smaller, they don't have reserves that they can depend on for a long time to remain in business. But we've introduced a range of measures for these types of businesses to prepare for Brexit, including supports and mechanisms to focus on new markets as well. And one of the interesting decisions that the Irish government has taken over the last 2 years is not to focus inward and actually to retreat inside a shell, but one of our responses as a government, as a country to Brexit, has actually been to look outward. So since the Brexit referendum, the Irish government has announced the opening of 15 new diplomatic missions around the world, including here in the United States, to develop new markets for our exports and to further build and promote Ireland's profile and influence globally. So we didn't really want Brexit, as I said at the start, but we're responding decisively to mitigate the effects of Brexit on our country and to defend our national interests as well. Now, if there's one other takeaway I'd like you to take away from today, one other point I'd really like to stress today, it's that I often get the question when I talk to audiences in Texas, will Ireland follow the UK out of the European Union? And I think that's an important point. The important point to stress today is that we are not following the UK. Ireland's not leaving the European Union. In fact, recent opinion polls have shown that more than 80%, so 4 out of 5 of Irish voters are strong in favour of remaining inside the European Union. It's hard to get 4 out of 5 people to decide on anything today, but that's a very, especially in Ireland sometimes, but that is I think a very definitive response to that question. And the reasons for this public support of EU membership are very, very clear. For Ireland, EU membership has delivered so many benefits, especially access to the world's largest and wealthiest internal market, the European internal market, about 500 million consumers. But also, on behalf of its member states, we were talking a little bit about this earlier as well, the EU negotiates trade deals, so on behalf of the whole Union. So that helps Ireland export a lot to some of the world's largest countries and trading blocs. But even more, I guess, more importantly to most Irish people is that ideologically, we have worked for years to ensure that EU values reflect Irish values. And these are things like a strong emphasis on the rule of law internationally, rules-based global trade agreements, and the protection and defence of democracy and human rights. And moreover, even now more so than ever, we find that common challenges require common solutions. I think the two great challenges facing the European Union and its individual member states, including Ireland today, two of the biggies are obviously climate change, mitigating the effects of climate change, and also migration. But I think one thing that I haven't mentioned so far, and perhaps this is the most important reason why so many Europeans are in favour of the European Union and the continued strengthening of the European Union, is that let us never forget that for over 75 years, Western Europe has been at peace. And also, since 1980, 13 former dictatorships have been helped transition to democracy and are now fully functioning democracies inside the European Union, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall in the late 80s. So for all of these reasons, Ireland will remain a committed and strong member of the European Union. We have a very, very long history with the European Union. It's 46 years ago now. And of course, we have a much longer history, and I can't go into that today, maybe a day for the talk, a much longer history with our next door neighbour in Britain. But for Ireland, this isn't really an either-or choice between the UK or membership of the European Union. We want the future relationship between the European Union and the UK to be as close, as positive as possible, and Ireland will work very, very hard with all of its partners to achieve that. So I thank you very, very much for your attention. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, if there are time for questions, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And thank you so much for your attention.
With so many members of the EU in such do you see the feasibility of the EU going forward on any sort of long-term basis lasting?
There's so many ways to answer that question. Well, first of all, I mean, the European economies are doing okay at the moment. They're growing quite strongly. And I think I turn the question around. I think Greece's European Union membership probably helped save Greece, really, from what could have been a lot worse. So I think the Greek economy is obviously recovering at the moment, and I think Greece and nearly, as I said, the majority of all of the European citizens of the European Union member states, the majority still continue their own individual countries' continued membership of the European Union.
Yes. On a similar note, many of us in the United States for the last 100 years have been surrogates for Europe and England. And we're getting a little tired of not only being surrogates, but also paying the bills. So what would you think if the United States said, well, Europe, you don't pay your NATO bill, for example, so why good luck?
Okay. Well, I have to answer that very, very clearly. The European Union and NATO are obviously two separate organizations. But they are, believe you me, because Ireland isn't a member of NATO, so I can't really answer that question because we're not in NATO. But perhaps it's a question, I guess, to pose to one of my other European French or German or British colleagues at some stage in the future. But they are two separate organizations. Ireland, I don't know how many member states there are now, is it 5 or 6 besides Ireland? We're neutral countries and we're not NATO members.
Yeah. Adrian, will you address sovereignty? That seems to be the overwhelming question in Great Britain about an unelected, at least from their standpoint, Parliament in Brussels making law for the electorate, you might say, in Great Britain. What's the Irish view of the same thing occurring there?
Well, this is one thing that
You
we
might want
often...
to repeat that.
Well, yeah, Jim just asked about the view from Britain that the Parliament in Brussels is unelected. It doesn't really represent the views, is making laws for citizens, and it's an unelected Parliament. And from the Irish perspective, this is something that we always found a little bit unusual. It was reported strongly, often in the British media, about an unelected Parliament. Well, the answer to that is in May this year, as every 5 years, we have elections in the European Parliament. So it's a directly elected Parliament. People put a vote in the ballot box to elect someone who goes to Strasbourg and Brussels to legislate on their behalf. EU laws are also made by, the EU, I have to say, as a citizen, it is a complicated institution, but it always has been a little bit of an experiment. And I think it's on the whole been a successful experiment, but it is a complicated structure, as you would expect for a body which is constantly growing, which has 28 different member states, and I don't know how many, is it 25 different languages and that kind of thing. But the European Parliament is directly elected by every single voter across Europe, so I think it was 500, I don't know how many it was, about 500 million voters, I guess, well, probably 500 million citizens, I don't know how many were already in, but you have hundreds of millions of people sending their MEPs, their members of the European Parliament, to legislate on their behalf in Brussels and Strasbourg. But also laws in Europe are made by things called councils of ministers. And what are councils of ministers? They're ministers from member state governments. So I think I heard yesterday, I was on the phone to Dublin about something, and the person I was talking was the education ministry. He said his minister, she was over in Brussels today, so she represents Ireland in education affairs, and basically she and her other colleagues tried to broker compromises and legislate on behalf of citizens as well. So they're not only are citizens directly represented in the European Parliament, but they're also represented when laws are being made by their ministers, their government ministers. And of course, twice or 3 times a year, the heads of government, prime ministers in Europe, get together as well, and they deal with the much larger issues as well. Now, could the European Union be more democratic? Of course. I mean, things could always be more, in all of our, I guess we could always look at ways of introducing more democracy. But it's odd that someone would say that the European Parliament is unelected or it's unrepresentative when basically citizens are putting a ballot in a box in Birmingham Rotterdam or Berlin or Bilbao or wherever across the European Union, and then that translates basically into a representative, standing for that person or for that region inside the European Parliament and voting on laws that will affect the lives of citizens. So.
We got a lot of questions. Armin?
What are some of the best ways Ireland and the U.S. can collaborate and work together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Ireland is we have a bit of a unique relationship, I would say, with the United States. And that's thanks to, I met two distant relatives here earlier. My mother's her name was Burke, and I met two, Anne and Amy, I think, earlier, who are also Burkes. So our relationship with the United States is a little bit different. We have what we call our diaspora here. So something like 32 million Americans in the last census ticked the box to say they're of Irish extraction or Irish heritage. So that's a very, very valuable resource for us. These people, they're great partners. They do an awful lot for us. So we have a very, I guess, a unique relationship with the United States. Irish Americans tend to be still very engaged with what they call the old sod or whatever, Ireland back home. And it's really helped us in so many ways. Our Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, mentioned a few times, will be meeting, he'll be coming to President Trump, to meet President Trump in March for St. Patrick's Day. And some of you, I think one or two of you may even have been in Austin last year. Our Prime Minister came to visit Texas last year, to visit Austin during South by Southwest, and met with Governor Abbott just before he flew up to Washington. So we have really, really good, strong relationships. I guess going into the future, we have strong relationships as it is, and most of those, as I said, have been built on this diaspora connection. Going into the future, we're not really sure. Obviously, so much is unclear, remains unclear about Brexit. Ireland will be the only English-speaking member of the European Union as of 1st of April, I guess, or from April when the British leave. So we would be working very, very hard to ensure, as we have in the past, but maybe to further serve as a bridge, I guess, between the United States and the European Union. And we've been doing that for a long time, but we may be doing it more now so than ever. And of course, we want to be pragmatic and constructive in that relationship. We spoke a little bit earlier about things like tariffs and trade wars and things like that between Europe, European Union and the United States. This is, I think, the last thing Europe and the EU need. We're both strong democratic blocs that depend on things like rules-based international trade. So now more so than ever, I think Europe and North America need to be cooperating rather than arguing. So hopefully going into the future, that will be the relationship, and it'll prosper still further, because the Europeans, Ireland, as I said, Ireland alone, a country of 4.7 million, is now the 9th largest global investor in the United States. And if you factor in the Germans, the French, the British, the Italians, the relations are so deep and so intensive.
Please describe, sir, how the Irish economy has grown and changed in the last 25 years. What are some of the areas of products and services in which you plan to grow your economy through exportation?
Well, I guess the two key words probably to talk about the Irish economy, the transformation of the Irish economy over the last 2 or 3 decades, basically are diversification and education. So let's focus on education first of all. In the 1970s, the Irish government took a decision to try and make education as accessible as possible to all. So university education, I know this is sometimes hard to take for an American audience, but university education is mostly free. So if you have the academic qualifications to get to university, it's essentially free for most people. So the idea, we don't have, I always say, especially to Texan audiences, unfortunately in Ireland we don't have any big natural resources like oil or gas or anything like that. So the natural resource, or the resource we invest in, is our human capital, our citizens. And one of the strongest ways of doing that is giving every citizen the best possible education. Ireland scores very, very highly internationally in terms of the quality of its education, and that's one of the reasons why we attract so much foreign direct investment that goes into the European Union. When US companies or Canadian or Korean, Japanese, whatever, Chinese companies need when they want to operate in the European market, they have to have some kind of a physical presence. It one of the member states, and a lot of them choose Ireland. Now, some reasons for that is that we are English speaking, that helps, or most of it, we're bilingual, but everyone can speak English. We're also a member of the Euro currency area, which most European Union member states are. But when especially we talk to techs and investors in Ireland, and you've got some of the biggies there like Dell, WP Engine, True Source Labs, all of these types of companies, when you ask them why they've chosen Ireland, it's really they say the quality of the workforce, the availability and quality of the workforce, and it's a competitively, I guess, in terms of wages, it's a competitive workforce as well. But one of the other things that Ireland has done over the last 3 decades is really to diversify. Going back to the very start of my remarks, when we joined the European Union in 1973, we were really dependent on one export market, that was our neighbour, the British, and we really had one export product. We were an agricultural exporter. We exported a lot of food. We've diversified greatly. Food and drink is still a major export for us. I was laughing on the way down today. I think Kerrygold, it's now the second largest butter brand in the United States. So we have those traditional exports as well as drink. But our largest export to the United States today is actually pharmaceuticals and medical devices, followed by financial services and software. So these are the types of areas. So we've spread the economy out, or diversified the economy somewhat, just like Texas has, to new sources, or to new areas, but also building on a very strong base, a very strong, adaptable and well-educated workforce at home as well. And demographics help as well, where we still have a small country, but we still have the youngest age profile in the European Union.
One of the advantages that Ireland has enjoyed over the last 20, 30 years has been the favorable tax arrangement they offer companies, particularly for the United States. Will that be threatened at all? It was threatened at one time by the European Union, because having access to the European Union is very advantageous, but on the other hand, the European Union would like to see a more level playing field. So how do you maneuver through that situation?
Yeah, I mean, Ireland also has a very favourable tax regime. It's very competitive internationally. I think Ireland no longer has the lowest tax rates for corporation tax, for example, in that specific area in Europe. But maybe to go back to what Jim's question earlier on, we were talking about sovereignty. The European Union, being a European Union member states give up sovereignty in some areas, or share pool sovereignty in some areas, and they don't in others. So tax is one area where member states still retain sovereignty. So the Irish government takes its own decisions in relation to tax. Ireland's working very hard, somewhat through the European Union, but probably more so through the OECD, which is another international organisation, and that's working very, very hard on changing or looking at the rules for international global taxation, and we're highly one of the most engaged members in that forum as well. So we'll see where that goes into the future.
Let me ask you, given the present issues in the state of Brexit right now, do you think that there's a possibility of presenting another referendum to the UK citizens?
I mean, that's a really good question, but like you, I guess.
The question?
Yeah, the question was, given the state of what's happening, I guess most recently in the UK, might there be another referendum in the UK on Brexit? I mean, that's a question I really would love that's a big question for me as well. I'd love to answer, but unfortunately, I guess it's a question really for the British people and the British government.
Because a lot of readings have shown that the British people in the last 2 years have realized how ill-informed they were before they made this choice. And now they are regretting it. And Theresa may very well have to present another referendum.
Again, it's such an interesting question, but I guess ultimately that's a question for the British government, the British people themselves. I just to draw from one, I didn't mention it in my remarks, but it is interesting. I just wanted to focus on something you said there. It is important to remember that when the Brexit referendum, the results came out, places like Northern Ireland and Scotland and London, the city of London, they are, in fact, majorities voted to stay inside the European Union. So it is a complicated picture.